I thought it was a romance. Turns out it's a manual on how to raise a maniac. Now my brain won't stop screaming, "Help! This psycho is way too good at love."
Trapped in the Phantom of the Opera, Episode 5. After clearing up the misunderstanding with Theodore, Polly realized he actually made a pretty decent bodyguard. Previously, Thorne had always accompanied her on outings. But Thorne was young, thin, and wore a head wrap, which constantly drew curious or judgmental looks from others. Theodore, on the other hand, was a different story. With his pronounced brow ridge, large nose, broad jawline, and towering 2.4-meter frame, Theodore had a rugged, primitive aura. Just sitting in the driver's seat was enough to silence not only nosy neighbors, but also the buzzing whispers of the entire street. An hour ago, Polly had asked the reporter if he knew a lawyer, specifically the kind who had graduated from a prestigious school but had recently messed up a few cases and was desperate for one big win to redeem himself. The reporter looked stunned. "How did you know I know someone like that?" Polly just shrugged. "Just a lucky guess." Following the reporter's directions, Polly lifted her skirt and stepped into a law office. The place was cramped, stuffy, and cluttered to the point of chaos. As she entered, she nearly tripped over a porcelain cup on the floor, its bottom stained with coffee residue, now sprouting a white film of mold. Suddenly, the desk jerked slightly, startling her. A man crawled out from underneath it, reeking of alcohol, and greeted her. "Ah, a lady, a rare visitor. What can I do for you today?" He had a proper face and wore a suit lined with red silk. He might once have been a distinguished gentleman, but now he looked more like a circus performer. Polly said, "Bob told me you're an excellent lawyer." Bob was the reporter's name. "Ah, Bob. Didn't expect that kid to send me business," the man replied. "Well, you could say that, but I must tell you, I've lost quite a few cases." "I know." Now I'm curious." He pulled out a chair and sat down. "So, what brings you here, ma'am? A dispute over a relative's will? Someone owe you money?" "Neither," Polly replied. "I see," he said, rummaging through a drawer for a cigarette. "You want me to draft a contract? What kind of contract?" "Still not it." Polly took a seat. "I want you to help me sue 3 gentlemen." His hand froze mid-search. The cheeky expression on his face vanished. He examined her for a moment, then stood, straightened his crooked tie, wiped his palms on his trousers, and extended a hand. "So you're Miss Clement, the one causing all the buzz in this town." "A pleasure." The man introduced himself as Rivers, a New Orleans native who had once worked at a top law firm in New York. But after losing a few major cases, he was forced to leave and return home, hoping to rebuild his career. Unfortunately, in New Orleans, there was little legal work to be found. At best, locals would ask him to draft a will or settle petty disputes over trees growing into neighbors' yards. The townsfolk cared a great deal about appearances. They would never hire a lawyer to collect debts or handle conflicts. So although Rivers maintained the image of a polished attorney, in reality, he was barely scraping by. He had seen Polly's feud with the 3 gentlemen in the papers, but never imagined she would go so far as to sue them. For a woman to argue with men in the press was already scandalous enough. Suing them? Unheard of. But Polly was just that bold. Not only had she argued publicly, she now intended to sue them for defamation. Rivers had handled many cases. One look, and he knew this was a guaranteed win. The American legal system was based on British common law, which relied heavily on precedent and social custom. A woman suing a man for defamation? Practically no precedent existed, so the ruling would hinge almost entirely on social norms. Yes, Polly had defied societal expectations. She wore trousers, had short hair, and ran a business. But none of that justified the men's slander, especially not publishing insults in the newspaper. What's more, New Orleans prided itself on its Southern chivalry, and the core of chivalry was this: men must respect women. If a woman was harassed or slandered, a gentleman was expected to defend her, no matter the cost. Yet Mitt, Wright, and Davis, respected gentlemen of the city, had openly insulted Polly in print. When Polly later pointed out that their comments violated Southern values, they didn't apologize. They doubled down. That alone made the case highly winnable. Polly handed him that morning's newspaper. "What about this article? Does it count as defamation too?" Rivers scanned it quickly. "Of course it does. That's pure slander. He has no proof your performance caused Mitt's so-called possession. Then could this article also serve as evidence that the gentleman's previous remarks damaged my reputation?" Absolutely. Absolutely. Rivers was getting excited. There have been cases where women sued men, he said. But defamation? This would be the first. Miss Clement, I'm willing to represent you pro bono, as long as you allow the details to be made public. Polly didn't immediately agree. Mr. Rivers, that doesn't seem like a fair trade. He blinked. Why not? This is a common law system, she said, catching him off guard. In common law, landmark cases are often cited for years. If we win, every similar case afterward will refer to our verdict, and your name will be forever etched into legal history. For such a rare opportunity, all you're offering is to waive your fee. Rivers was stunned. He hadn't expected Polly to know anything about law. He scratched his head. So what do you want? Money? Bonds? Property? I saved quite a bit when I was in New York. Name your price. If I don't have it, I'll borrow it. I don't want money, Polly said. Then we're in trouble, Rivers sighed. As you can see, business here is awful. I haven't had a real case in weeks. If you're hoping for social connections or introductions to influential people, I'm afraid I can't help. Polly laughed. You're overthinking it. What I want is you. I want you to be my chief legal counsel. Rivers paused, then readily agreed. The two made an excellent team. Rivers focused on gathering evidence, finding witnesses, and preparing arguments. Polly, meanwhile, worked her charm, befriending witnesses and generating media buzz around the case. The law office stank so badly that after 2 visits, Polly couldn't take it anymore. She asked him to move into the villa. And so, the circus household welcomed a new member. Rivers soon discovered that the infamous article, "The Circus Show That Drove a Gentleman Mad," was written by a local theater manager. That made their case even stronger. As a direct business competitor, the manager had no objectivity in assessing Polly's performance or her character. Even if he weren't a rival, the fact that he was a man publicly slandering a woman was damning enough. Men were supposed to see women as innocent, fragile, in need of protection. If a man couldn't outdo a woman in business and resorted to defaming her instead, that was the lowest of the low. As whispers filled the city, Polly's circus finally opened. Insanity, safety concerns, a woman suing men for defamation. Whether people supported or criticized her, Polly and her circus became a staple in every newspaper. Many high society ladies swore they would never attend her performances. They even vowed to ignore her if they saw her on the street. But on opening day, they showed up. Polly had announced there would be 2 leaderboards outside the tavern, one for individuals, one for family clans. Each family member's completion time would be added together. That meant the family rankings reflected not just wealth, each ticket cost $5, but also bravery. Currently, Davis's family sat at the very bottom. Although Wright and Davis had exited the haunted house together, Davis had taken the first step, securing his place at the bottom. Theater managers from rival companies also came to watch the spectacle. They assumed Polly's show would flop. Never mind her being a woman, her format just didn't make business sense. A proper theater could seat hundreds. How many could her tavern accommodate per show? To their shock, Polly had shortened the performance and introduced leaderboards. Plus, because the venue was a tavern, she could sell drinks and snacks alongside tickets. People came for the drama, only to be lured by the smells of roast potatoes, lamb skewers, and Mexican burritos. Seeing Polly rake in the cash, her competitors were red with envy. Some theater managers even considered hiring a dozen writers to smear her in local tabloids. But with the lawsuit looming, they bit their tongues and grumbled in private. Polly didn't notice their envy. She was too busy crunching numbers, heads spinning. She desperately wanted to drag Erik out of the haunted house to help with accounting. Thankfully, her phone had a calculator. At night, she could check the books without too much pain. Otherwise, she would have smashed her head into the ledger. After opening day, she did a rough tally of the earnings. Excluding costs, she had made $100 in one day. A staggering figure. Most workers made only $10 a week. Granted, opening day had lots of repeat purchases. For instance, one man who held a grudge against Mitt went in 5 or 6 times, desperate to beat his score. In the end, just before a complete mental breakdown, he finally topped Mitt on the board. Polly was in awe. She deeply regretted that large display screens didn't exist yet. Otherwise, she would have played that guy's name next to Mitt's on a loop, giving him endless emotional validation. Then she had a thought. Maybe Erik could find a way to make it happen? Lately, she had been so busy, rehearsing with actors by day and discussing the lawsuit with Rivers at night, that she hadn't spoken to Erik much. She admitted some of that was on purpose. Sometimes, even when she'd finished everything and was playing on her phone, she'd wave Erik away without even looking up, claiming to be busy. His senses were sharp. Of course, he knew she was lying. A few times, she could feel him about to question her, but each time he restrained himself. Polly figured, just one more push and he'd snap. But Erik's self-control was frighteningly strong. She still hadn't found anything that could truly provoke him. Even with her spending time around Theodore and Rivers, he hadn't reacted. So she set the idea aside. For now that the opening performance was done, she could finally relax and maybe reconnect with Erik. After the crowd dispersed, Polly lifted her skirt and hurried upstairs, only to find that the one operating the haunted house's mechanics wasn't Erik. It was Thorn. Thorn had always been uneasy about performing, so Polly had assigned him backstage duties, asking Erik to teach him how to operate the mechanisms. Erik hadn't objected. He was even somewhat gentle with Thorn, though Thorn still cried a few times from fear. Once, Polly barely stopped Erik from hypnotizing Thorn to speed up the process. But she could only intervene so much. While Polly and Rivers were off strategizing their case, Erik had already force-fed the knowledge into Thorn's brain. When Thorn woke up, he remembered how to operate everything, but at the mere mention of Erik's name, he turned pale and shook like a leaf. Polly never dared let Erik teach anyone again. Still, hypnosis was remarkably effective. All day long, Polly had thought Erik was the one pulling the strings. She praised Thorn for doing a great job, then asked, "Where's your teacher?" Thorn, proud of his first solo operation, replied with a flushed face, "He went back." "Back where?" "The villa." Polly was puzzled. Erik didn't live with them. Why return to the villa? She didn't dwell on it. Instead, she gave Auntie Freeman a stack of cash and asked her to treat the team to a feast at a nice restaurant. Rivers had attended the opening too. He tried to follow Polly back to the villa. She grabbed him by the collar and handed him to Auntie Freeman. "Make sure he eats something good." Theodore asked softly, "And you?" "I've got something to do at the villa." Polly tied a ribbon beneath her wide-brimmed hat, climbed into her carriage and called out, "Go have fun! We made a fortune today!" After saying goodbye to the others, she snapped the reins and turned the carriage toward the villa. No sense of danger at all, only curiosity. Why had Erik chosen today to go back to the villa? He'd never cared about boundaries before. Her bedroom? He'd enter whenever he pleased. Her things? He'd look through them at will. Could it be that he finally realized this was inappropriate and had chosen to stay away? Polly's heart thumped wildly. Her palms began to sweat. It felt like she was about to open a mystery box. Had he finally reached his limit? Was he going to confront her at last? She whipped the reins harder. Whatever came next, she couldn't wait. The carriage pulled up in front of the villa. Polly stepped down, handed the reins to the driver, smoothed her messy skirt, and walked toward the house. Inside the main hall, the lighting was dim, with no signs of anyone having been there. She removed her shoes and placed them gently on the carpet, walking barefoot toward the stairs. The staircase was cloaked in shadows. The hallway beyond was even darker. Polly couldn't shake the eerie feeling of being watched, as if Erik was hidden somewhere within the shadows, silently observing her, calm and indifferent. She didn't see him, but she could smell him. The dry, dangerous scent of cypress, mixed with thick testosterone, made her heart beat a little faster. It felt like he was silently closing in. Polly's heart gave a hard thump. She deliberately stopped, waiting for him to come closer. But the moment she paused, the feeling of being watched vanished. Polly. With no other option, she turned the doorknob and stepped inside. The bedroom was dim, unchanged from when she had left. Erik didn't seem to have touched anything. She walked over to the desk and was just about to open a drawer when she suddenly felt that familiar presence approach. Startled, she turned her head, only to lock eyes with a pair of burning golden irises. Erik was standing right behind her. His eyes burned like golden flames, sweeping a strange shiver through her body. Before she could say anything, he stepped forward and grabbed her hand. Her heart skipped a beat. He lowered his head, almost as if sniffing her palm. Her pulse quickened. She tried to pull her hand back, curious how he'd react. But maybe she had pushed him too far lately, playing hot and cold, because the moment she moved, he clamped her wrist and yanked her forward roughly. The sudden intensity made her scalp tingle. Just like the day they first met, she had no idea what he would do next. Erik pried her fingers apart one by one and inhaled deeply between them, not even sparing her wrist. For a second, Polly thought he was going to kiss her, not just her fingers, but somewhere far more dangerous. Instead, his first words were, "Why aren't you moving?" She blinked. "Because I don't know what you're trying to do. Is that so?" His eyes narrowed. Then, without warning, he drew a dagger and pressed the cold blade to her finger. "I thought you knew exactly what I wanted." The chill of the blade made goosebumps rise on her skin. But not out of fear. When he actually wanted to kill her, he didn't speak like this, didn't look like this. Now, his eyes and actions were intense, twisted with something deeper than rage. And that was exactly what she wanted. For days she had alternated between ignoring him and chatting happily with others, only to suddenly turn and look at him like he was the only person in the world. All of it was to stir his curiosity, to force him to get closer. She hadn't expected this particular reaction, the knife against her finger. But then again, he wasn't normal. Polly asked softly, "Are you going to kill me? What do you think?" His gaze pressed down on her like a weight. Her knees buckled, and she accidentally bumped into the dagger. The next second, Erik's knee rose and propped up her collapsing body. "Stand straight." His tone was icy and commanding. If she didn't know him better, she'd think he had discovered her kink, using aggression and dominance to deliberately entice her. "What do you want from me?" She frowned and looked away, feigning impatience. "I only came back to change for the celebration. If you're not going to kill me, then let me go." Erik stared at her like he wanted to shove his gaze into her mouth and make her stop talking. Here she was again, playing that hot and cold game. One moment, she smiled at him, her hazel eyes clear and warm, as if he was her only anchor. The next, she heard River's voice and left him behind, off to discuss legal matters with the man. The emotional cramp in his chest was unbearable, but that was only the beginning. Until now, he had resisted digging into her secrets. Whatever Polly did, he looked the other way. Her haunted house design, both in concept and in business model, was far ahead of its time. Her understanding of the law far exceeded that of most people. Others might not even report a robbery. She was already finding legal loopholes, and even secured a lawyer to work for her for free. She had never hidden her brilliance. Clement, the woman Polly was impersonating, had been a timid, short-sighted girl with almost no willpower. If she hadn't been framed for stealing a gold watch, Erik would never have noticed her. He hadn't even bothered hypnotizing her, just looked at her twice and she turned pale, trembling like a leaf. But in one night, she transformed into someone completely different, composed, calm, and even trying to save him. He followed her, tapped her teeth with a knife, and all she did was sweat. No breakdown, no fear. She even tried to recruit him to start a circus. He didn't know why, but he hadn't refused. Even though she was suspicious in every way, he never questioned her too deeply. After all, if she had bad intentions, he could kill her anytime. And yet, somehow, he couldn't. Even worse, he started to feel curious about her words, her actions, her thoughts, her identity. She was spontaneous, but not the kind of spontaneity learned over time. It felt innate. Her laughter, her gaze, her posture, completely unlike anyone else. As if a soul from another world had entered this body. America's legal system was weak. Even now, many outlaws roamed free. Robberies in the countryside were common. Ordinary people defamed in the press usually just accepted their bad luck. But she, her eyes glinted with delight, like someone from a world where the law ruled. Sometimes, though, she was strangely clueless. She didn't know how to ride a horse, didn't know how to shoot a gun, didn't know how to start a fire. Yet she recognized cameras, understood photographs. But the first time she saw a magnesium flash flare up, with its violent hiss, she flinched, eyes wide, pupils dilated. 2 seconds later, she snapped back, composed. He had been watching from the shadows then, and in that moment, she looked exactly like someone from another world. A world where cameras didn't use magnesium flash, where photographs were printed in vibrant color, instantly visible. He remembered, once in her room, she toyed casually with a small box, lifted it, lowered it. Then, by accident, a photo appeared on its surface, bright, vivid, lifelike. A camera that needed no flash, no development, no drying. How could something like that exist? She always carried strange things, but never hid them from him, almost as if she knew he couldn't use them, even if he had them. Then yesterday, he intercepted a letter she had mailed to New York. The recipient? Nikola Tesla, care of Westinghouse Electric Company. He knew of Westinghouse. They were in a legal battle with the world's most famous inventor, Thomas Edison. But who was Nikola Tesla? He resealed the letter and sent it on its way, then spent hours researching Tesla's background. Turns out, Tesla wasn't even American. He used to work at Edison's lab, but later partnered with Westinghouse. His Serbian accent was thick. Even after speaking to hundreds of electrical engineers, he remained relatively unknown. When people thought generator, they still thought Edison. So why had Polly written to Tesla? Light bulbs use direct current. Even if she got her hands on alternating current, she couldn't power a villa. What did she want an AC generator for? At last he realized, suppressing his curiosity had been a mistake. If he had paid more attention earlier, he wouldn't be losing his mind now. Who was she? Where did she come from? Why had she saved him? Why build a circus? She seemed to know him too well. Even when afraid of him, she looked at him with a strange gaze, as if he wasn't real, as if he were a character in a book or a painting on a wall. Even that first kiss, on the mask, wasn't an act of sympathy. She knew exactly how to tame him. Erik ran through everything he knew. He didn't know what conclusions to draw, only that he was falling deeper and deeper. Curiosity was a bad omen. He told himself that, even if he uncovered the truth, so what? She would never love him. And yet, he still wanted to know why. His curiosity had festered too long. It was like an infected wound, itching and burning. Finally, he found a clue in her notebook. He spoke more than 10 languages: Persian, Turkish, Arabic, Hebrew, even some Greek, from his years in the Mazandaran palace. But the language in her notebook? Unfamiliar, vaguely recognizable, but not one he could read. He thought he'd seen it once, in the French Quarter of New Orleans. There, a poster had featured similar characters. That part of town was home to many Chinese immigrants. Did Polly know Chinese? He went to the French Quarter and found the poster. Compared it carefully. It was the same writing style, but Chinese wasn't something you could just pick up on your own. Unlike the other languages, he couldn't teach it to himself in days or even weeks. So he copied the characters and asked some English-speaking Chinese residents for help. None of them could fully understand it either. A few young men said it looked like cursive script, with strokes resembling semi-formal handwriting. They attempted a rough translation, but couldn't guarantee accuracy. Still, it was enough for him to understand the general meaning, especially one sentence. No matter what he looks like, don't be afraid of his appearance. Don't show shock or disgust or something. Truly terrible will happen. Truly terrible? Erik let out a dry laugh. If she knew what he'd been thinking lately, she wouldn't have written that, because much worse things awaited her. He closed his eyes, unable to tell whether the emotion rising in his chest was fury or something else entirely. All he knew was, if he didn't let it out soon, he would lose his mind. The night he found out the truth, he tried to release it. He spent the whole night at the piano, composing, playing, composing, but his fingers disobeyed him. Every note, every measure, overflowed with violent, monstrous desire. The music was no longer a melody. It was a fight. He tried to reclaim his rhythm, to control the pressure, speed, and angle of every keystroke. But his hands no longer listened. For a man who once controlled music like breathing, that night was a nightmare. One thought repeated in his mind: make her look at my face and kiss me. Polly noticed he hadn't spoken in a while. Just as she was about to push him further, he suddenly said, "I saw what you wrote." She froze. What? He gave a cold smile. If he tries to kill you, the best way to survive is to kiss him, hug him, or make physical contact, right? Her heart skipped a beat. She remembered now, but she had written it in simplified Chinese. How did he understand? As if reading her thoughts, he said, "There are Chinese people in New Orleans." Polly groaned inwardly. She'd almost forgotten. This was still during the westward expansion. It was the era of the gold rush. Chinese laborers were everywhere. Farming, mining, building railroads. The US government never acknowledged their contributions. Not until more than a century later did the White House finally condemn the Chinese Exclusion Act. She drifted off in thought. With the haunted house so short-staffed, maybe she could hire some Chinese women to help. Erik misread her silence and said coldly, "What are you thinking? That I'm so dangerous, so unpredictable, you need to decide where exactly to kiss me to survive?" Polly. Even though she knew he was angry, the question sounded kind of hilarious. "That was something I wrote a long time ago," she said patiently. "Back then I didn't know you." "Really?" he asked. "Then how do you explain this line? You need to use empathy. Talk more with people who've experienced similar trauma." Polly. She couldn't even remember writing that, but he remembered it word for word. She paused, then said frankly, "I admit, that was what I truly thought back then. You were dangerous. I needed to survive." He didn't reply, but his breathing grew uneven. Polly thought for a moment and added, "You can't blame someone for wanting to stay alive, but believe me, ever since you stopped wanting to kill me, every time I kissed you, it was real. I meant it. You've given me experiences I've longed for, things only you could give me." She felt she had said enough. A few seconds later, Erik loosened his grip. Polly thought, finally, they could have a real conversation. But then he asked, still cold, "It was real?" She nodded. "It was real, even though I'm dangerous?" She smiled gently. "That's exactly why I'm drawn to you." She didn't know how he interpreted that, because in the next moment, he threaded his fingers into her hair, gripped the back of her head, and tilted her face up. It was like grabbing someone by the hair, but softer, more intimate. Maybe because his emotions were so intense now, his scent was stronger too. Sharp cypress and overpowering masculinity invaded her senses. Her mind swayed. She could almost feel her heartbeat echoing in her throat. His cold, rough, dangerous aura hit all her weak spots. Even when he pressed a knife to her fingers, she had been thrilled. Now, angry over a few lines in her notebook, he was even more magnetic. It wasn't normal, but she couldn't stop. His shadow fell over her. Their eyes met, and in that tangled gaze, his stare was sharp enough to bite. Was she scared? Yes, but it felt like a shot of adrenaline, pure, exhilarating terror. She held her breath. He leaned in, slowly removed his white mask. Polly had imagined many ways this might happen, but never that he would be the one to remove it. The surge of tension hit her like a tidal wave. Her scalp tightened, her lungs froze. Then, as he tightened his grip, he whispered, "Remember what you wrote?" "I remember." A pause. His voice turned to command. "Then kiss me." Polly's mind went completely blank. She never expected Erik's appearance to align so perfectly with her exact preferences. She had always known her tastes were a bit off. Compared to regular movies, she was way more into horror films, especially the ones where the lead wasn't even human, but some kind of supernatural creature. Even better, she still remembered the first horror film she'd ever seen. When the male lead first appeared on screen, his face and figure were flawless. Her friends all swooned, saying how hot he was. Polly barely glanced up from her dinner. Then halfway through the movie, the male lead got cursed. His skin peeled away, revealing nothing but a sticky, disgusting skeleton. He reached out to the heroine, signaling for her to kiss him. It was supposed to be a terrifying moment, but Polly felt blood rush to her head. Her ears burned. A wild thrill surged through her, totally out of her control. From that day on, she developed the habit of watching horror movies while eating. She wasn't one of those people who couldn't separate fantasy from reality. Her preferences never bled into her actual dating life. Her exes were all regular guys, normal college students. She never thought, not even in her wildest dreams, that someday her strange little preferences would be completely satisfied. Inside the bedroom, Erik's face was half hidden in shadow, the other half faintly illuminated by a dim light. The visible side was sharp and coldly handsome, defined features, deep-set eyes. But the other half, a horror. His eye socket was sunken, skull-like, hollow, indifferent, oozing an inhuman eeriness. The skin looked like it had been burned, horribly scarred, stretched tight over an angular jaw. By any standard definition, this was not an attractive face. Anyone who saw it would recoil in fear. That skeletal appearance was pure nightmare fuel. No one in their right mind would find it sexually appealing, or worse, be aroused by it. But then again, Polly's preferences weren't exactly normal. She stared at him, hearing the pounding of her own heart grow louder and faster. She had never felt grateful for time traveling. Even now, she didn't like the 19th century. Hated stepping out the door and into grimy, muddy streets. Hated how even lifting her skirt an inch would earn stares and whispers from passers-by. She especially hated foggy days. Her eyes would dry out and sting, and she'd start sneezing nonstop. Too many nearby factories. The smog was thick with coal dust and dirt. But if not for this time travel fluke, she would have never met someone so precisely tailored to her tastes. He gave her not just the terror she craved, but the look she fantasized about. Without blinking, Polly reached out and touched the terrifying side of his face. Erik didn't move, but she could feel it, a subtle tremor under her palm. His Adam's apple bobbed violently. Goosebumps rose from his neck to his ears. His breathing grew ragged, like 1,000 tiny brandings pressing into her fingers. Burning hot. She saw the tips of his ears flush red. Even his neck was slightly flushed. He was far less composed than she'd imagined, maybe even sensitive, yet his expression remained cold to the point of horror. His golden eyes locked onto hers, unmoving. His grip on the back of her head tightened. "What are you waiting for?" She noticed the vein bulging in his neck, flushed with blood, pulsing with a strange heat. He looked like he was caught between rage and shame. And Polly loved it. She took a deep breath to steady herself, then asked in the calmest tone she could manage, "Where exactly do you want me to kiss you?" "You wrote it down," he replied icily. "You tell me." Seconds ticked by. Polly said nothing. Erik assumed she wouldn't do it, that she'd dodge it, stall with excuses. It was the ending he'd predicted. True, she hadn't screamed like his mother did, hadn't fainted, hadn't gibbered in panic while trembling and handing him his mask. But her silence, her distant, blank gaze, said it all. No one wants to kiss a monster. It had been his curse since the day he was born. Her notebook had spelled it out clearly. Polly only approached him, hugged him, kissed him, so she could survive under his control. So why, upon seeing the truth, did he still feel this crushing pain in his chest? There were other entries in the notebook too. Some Chinese phrases, the locals said, were so strange they didn't even dare translate them, afraid of twisting the meaning entirely. Erik hadn't pushed the issue. Now, staring into her eyes, he wondered, were those untranslated lines some secret strategy? Some other way she planned to deal with him? Would she insult him? Stab him with a hidden weapon? Erik slowly loosened his grip on the back of her head. But just as he let go, Polly suddenly grabbed his collar. There was no contest between their strengths. She couldn't possibly pull him forward. But somehow, under her tug, he leaned down anyway. Their lips met, soft, warm, and wet. His mind went completely blank. It took several seconds for him to register it. She had kissed him. Polly had only intended a light touch, just a brush of lips. She knew it. She'd tested it. When she pulled away, he'd chase her. The notebook was proof. She'd already succeeded in making him curious, making him speak, making him physically close in on her. But it wasn't enough. Right now, he was only hooked. Her real goal was to get him to confess, to say what he wanted, to say he liked her. She wasn't about to spoil him all at once. Polly started to lean back, but Erik, as if possessed by the kiss, suddenly gripped the back of her head again and slammed his lips into hers. His strength was overwhelming. It hurt. Worse, he seemed angry. His expression went cold, and the force of his kiss intensified, like he was trying to glue himself to her mouth. He didn't know what a kiss was. All he knew was pressure, grinding against her lips, inhaling her breath, devouring her entirely. Polly struggled for air. To avoid suffocating, she flicked her tongue out lightly against his lips. It was like dropping a spark into dried tinder. Erik's eyes locked onto hers, and for the first time, Polly felt genuinely afraid. He gripped her jaw like a predator capturing prey, then dove in, ravaging her tongue without restraint. It was only then that Polly truly understood. He might really be that young, completely untrained, wild, insatiable. For a split second, she actually thought he might bite off her tongue and swallow it whole. Even she started to panic, shoving at his shoulders. He didn't react, just kept clinging to her lips, greedily sucking down her breath and saliva. It wasn't until a tear welled at the corner of her eye, purely from lack of air, that he finally paused. Even then, his lips stayed pressed against hers, like they were glued together. Polly seized the moment and pulled away. but Erik was already lost in the kiss. As she leaned back, his reflex was to grab her wrist, yank her in, and press his lips to hers again. Polly was torn. On one hand, the kiss was insanely hot, unlike anything she'd ever experienced. A brand new sensation. On the other hand, he was terrifyingly intense. If she let him keep going, her lips would either swell like balloons or lose a chunk of tongue. It was insane. No one kissed like this. Sensing her hesitation, he instinctively took a step forward, his knee slipping between hers. Polly could barely breathe. Her ears burned. On one side, unprecedented thrill. On the other, real danger to her mouth. Too hard to choose. Finally, the thought of tomorrow's haunted house shift yanked her back to reality. She looked at Erik. He was staring right at her, completely still, his pupils shrunken to pinpricks, golden irises ablaze. A beast. Pure and simple. Most people would have been terrified. But Polly, she loved it. From head to toe, his personality, his looks, everything. She closed her eyes. I'll enjoy this for a few more seconds, then slap him to make him let go. But before she could act, Erik suddenly let go of her. He seemed to come to his senses. His expression turned calm, though his facial muscles still twitched slightly and the wild emotion in his eyes hadn't faded. He stared at her, chest heaving, thoughts unreadable. Polly noticed a faint shine on his lips. She swallowed instinctively. He immediately mirrored her, swallowing like it was a signal, then leaned forward again, trying to kiss her, like a reflex. But this time, he caught himself. Polly waited for him to say something. When he didn't, she asked, "What's wrong? Did I do something wrong?" He had told her what he wanted, and she had done it. But that only confused him more. Why? Was it just a tactic? Or he heard his own voice, disturbingly calm. "You're not disgusted?" "Not at all," Polly answered. "I really liked that kiss." "Didn't you?" He couldn't tell if she was lying or not. The shame was overwhelming. His whole body tingled, burned from within. And worse, that wild, rage-like impulse began to rise again. Erik's face went stiff. He stepped back sharply. At the same time, Polly continued, "I don't just like the kiss. I like how you look." "You like how I look?" Polly nodded, totally unaware of how absurd the lie sounded. "Your appearance matches my ideal type perfectly." Erik had never heard something so ridiculous in his life. Every word, every syllable, reeked of falseness. It made his skin crawl. And yet, that wild, furious impulse believed her. Blood rushed downward, desperately seeking release. He tried to calm his heartbeat. He felt like he was on fire. Only his voice stayed cold. "What game are you playing now?" Polly gave up trying to explain. She grabbed his collar again and kissed him on the scarred side of his face. After the kiss, Erik didn't look the least bit happy. Everything about this felt so bizarre that it actually cooled the heat in his blood. He had no idea what Polly was thinking. No idea whether she was telling the truth. No idea why she was kissing him. He didn't even know where she had come from. Until now, he had never cared about any of those things. But now, he felt something he'd never felt before. Fear. Before she realized it, Polly had come to understand Erik extremely well. If she pressed further now, he'd likely vanish just like he had in the past. The best strategy was to retreat in order to advance. Luckily, she was hungry anyway. After all, she had skipped the celebration dinner just to rush home and see what he was up to. And she hadn't been disappointed. He had removed his mask and even taken the initiative to kiss her. So Polly didn't answer his question. Instead, she said, "I'm hungry." "Do you know how to cook?" Erik stared at her for a moment, then silently put on his white mask and walked out of the bedroom. If he really meant to leave, he would have disappeared without a word. Was he actually going to cook for her? Polly blinked and followed him. Sure enough, Erik headed straight for the kitchen, pulled off his black leather gloves, rolled up his sleeves, and looked up at her. "What do you want to eat?" He rarely exposed his hands in front of her, not even during their kiss earlier. Now, with the gloves off, his long, elegant fingers were fully revealed. His skin was pale, nearly bloodless, giving off a kind of cold, ascetic aura. Yet the veins on the backs of his hands stood out clearly, like blue sculptures running all the way up his arms. Polly couldn't help staring. He had grown so quickly. In just a short time, not only had he gotten taller, but his arms had grown noticeably more muscular too. Erik felt the hairs on his body stand on end under her gaze. Earlier, when he'd taken off the mask in a moment of lost control, he hadn't felt much of anything. But now he realized his entire face had been fully exposed to her, not a single detail hidden. He had never felt so naked. His face was exposed. His hands were exposed. From head to toe, he was completely covered by her gaze. Seeing him flush from his ears down to his arms, as if breaking out in an allergic rash, Polly finally looked away. "You don't know my taste?" They'd never actually shared a meal at the same table, but Erik didn't say anything. He simply turned to gather ingredients. All the vegetables had been neatly stacked on the ground by Auntie Freeman. The pork, beef, and lamb were stored in the ice cellar. Polly had never set foot in the kitchen. She didn't even know where the ice cellar was. But Erik? He moved through the house like he owned the place, finding it effortlessly. Polly wanted to ask, "Just how many times have you been to my home?" But when she saw his ears burning red, she swallowed the question. She didn't want to scare him off. He really seemed to know her taste. He knew she had a sweet tooth, but hated cream and beef stew. Still, that didn't mean she couldn't stand cream altogether. If it was turned into a thick, rich sauce and poured over tender lobster, she loved it. Her absolute favorite, though, was chili. Auntie Freeman had once said she'd never met a girl who loved spicy food so much. Erik clearly knew that too. Aside from the creamy lobster, every other dish had some form of Mexican chili sauce. Polly watched from the side. The way he handled the knife was almost disturbingly calm, slicing the meat with such precision, each piece perfectly even. It reminded her of those high IQ killers in horror films, calmly butchering a body. Oh, right. He kind of was one. Polly stared for another 10 minutes until Erik, unable to bear it any longer, scowled and kicked her out of the kitchen. Honestly, she hadn't expected much from the meal. Sure, Erik was an all-around genius, but being good at everything didn't guarantee he could cook. Besides, taste was so subjective. They had over 100 years worth of generational gap between them. Polly's standards weren't high. As long as it tasted better than her school cafeteria, she'd be satisfied. But the moment she took a bite of the lobster, her eyes widened. It was perfectly suited to her taste. The texture, the spices, the balance of salt and sweetness. Everything was exactly how she liked it. Polly looked at him, stunned. How did he manage this? You could estimate dress size by eye, but flavor? Had he figured out her taste preferences just by observing her? Erik had already retreated into the shadows. Arms crossed, he briefly met her gaze, then looked away. His expression hadn't changed much, but something about it hit her hard. How long had he been watching her? Long enough to understand her tastes in such detail? Polly stared at the delicious spread in front of her, and suddenly lost her appetite. Like most modern people, her views on romance weren't frivolous, but they weren't exactly serious either. That's how she treated Erik as well. His looks, personality, and actions all matched her preferences. Whenever they were alone, she'd get that subtle, fluttery feeling in her chest. Wanting to date someone like him? Totally normal. But she'd never thought about the future, never considered what his attitude toward love might be. And just now, when their eyes met, maybe he didn't even realize it himself, but the emotion in his gaze was so intense it was terrifying. People say it's hard to change your nature. That one look made it clear. Erik was the kind of person who, once he fell in love, would never let go. In modern society, no one uses phrases like love until death anymore. With survival pressure mounting, people joke about how it's okay to fake love, but not to steal money. But Erik clearly wasn't one of those people. He looked like someone who believed in love that lasted until death. Polly's heart pounded. She nearly dropped her fork. She wasn't even sure what she was feeling anymore. Everything seemed to be spinning out of control. When he treated her like prey, chasing her, cornering her, threatening her with a knife, yes, she was scared. But it also felt thrilling, like stepping out of reality. Now, knowing he might love her for life, her heart plummeted like it had fallen off a skyscraper. Was it fear? Not quite. More like guilt. Despite the emotional storm, she still finished most of the dishes. They were just too good. When she finished eating, Erik stepped forward to clear the table and wash the dishes. Even the way he washed dishes was visually pleasing, but Polly had no mood to appreciate it now. Guilt gnawed at her. She found an excuse and slipped away. Originally, she had planned to ignore Erik for the next few days, force him to make a move. She was a little worried she wouldn't be able to pull off the act. But now, after realizing he might love her forever, she didn't even have to fake it. Every time she saw him, her eyes dodged instinctively. In truth, a love that lasts until death isn't such a bad thing. Polly's real problem was that she didn't want to stay in the 19th century forever. She wanted to go back. And if she did go back, what would Erik do? That thought made her anxious. He was so smart, always watching her. Now he was curious. Add in that notebook? Had he already guessed that she wasn't from this time? If he figured out she was from a century in the future, if he realized she might return someday, what would he do? Would he snap? Polly cursed her impulsive kinks. This was a tense situation, and her first reaction to Erik possibly going berserk was excitement. She was beyond saving. One day, she'd die because of her own kinks. After tossing and turning for a week, Polly finally came to terms with it. Whatever happens, happens. Who knew if she could even return? Who knew if Erik would really fall for her? Nothing was certain yet. Worrying so much about the future was just needless anxiety. So she shoved all those thoughts aside and went back to playing it cool with Erik. Hot and cold, distant yet lingering. Just as she was wondering when to reel him in, a huge piece of news dropped in the city. Someone named Graves had launched a new haunted house that blatantly copied her entire business model. He called it the Freak House. Graves had clearly planned this. He had way more capital than Polly. First thing he did was rent a massive estate on the outskirts of town. Then he hired a famous screenwriter to write the script and cast local theater stars in the lead roles. It caused quite a stir. He even made a bold announcement in the newspaper. Whatever prizes Polly's place offers, the Freak House will double it. If her haunted house offered $10 in compensation when an actor touched a guest, he'd offer $20. If her guests won $500 for clearing the maze in under 8 minutes, his guests would get $1,000. $500 was already a huge sum. $1,000? That was astronomical. The news sparked chaos, even among factory workers. They worked 12-hour shifts, barely making 50 cents a day. Skin and bones, drenched in sweat, with every swing of the hammer echoing in their brittle bones. $1,000 meant grinding away for 1,000 days, non-stop. While the poor sweated in factories, the rich were paying to scare themselves for fun. The world was too unfair. Even the upper-class ladies of New Orleans began to gossip. Polly had become way too popular. Despite being a woman with no noble blood or ladylike grace, she was thriving like crazy. That defied Southern tradition and decency. Many of them were secretly curious about her haunted house, but couldn't bring themselves to pay money to a woman like her. If the Freak House outperformed her, it would knock her down a peg, something that would only benefit high society. Meanwhile, Graves kept stirring the pot in the press. In one article, he claimed that Polly's haunted house concept had originated in India. He insisted he'd wanted to launch the Freak House 6 months ago, but had been delayed due to lack of funding. He even referenced Polly's lawsuit with the 3 gentlemen, choosing his words carefully. I don't know where Miss Clement learned about this type of performance, and regardless of how she came by it, I would never question a lady's character. That said, please believe that the Freak House offers the most authentic and professional experience. The implication? Polly had stolen his business idea. The moment the news broke, Polly's circus had to shut down and suspend operations. She hadn't wanted to close, but Graves' accusations had stirred up too much controversy. People started showing up just to hurl insults. Every time someone tried to buy a ticket, a chorus of boos would erupt. Operating under those conditions would be a joke and a financial loss, so she shut it down. For now. It was Marbell's first time encountering someone like Graves. She was furious. That man is a snake, a pig, a disgrace to white people, and those audience members are idiots. Can't they see Graves as just slinging lies? If this type of haunted house really came from India, Theodore added, why didn't anyone mention it before? Even Emily, usually calm, was angry. These people used to say Miss Clement's performances were nothing but a temptress's money-making scheme. Now Graves does the exact same thing, and they call it groundbreaking innovative theater. It's disgusting. Polly, on the other hand, remained calm. She even consoled them. Don't worry. I know exactly how to make them go bankrupt. Graves was arrogant. He thought that with more money, grander sets, flashier props, and good media spin, he could trample Polly underfoot. He saw how hot her haunted house had become and copied her tricks without hesitation. But he'd made one critical mistake. Of all the things he could copy, he should never have copied this one. Clear the maze in under 8 minutes, win $1,000. Polly only dared make that offer because she had Erik. During the haunted house's run, there were bold guests who nearly finished in time. Even the more timid ones, after 10 or so runs, got familiar with the layout and came close to winning. Whenever that happened, Polly would send in Erik. Master of magic and hypnosis, he controlled every trap, tunnel, and hidden door in the tavern. Sometimes, he didn't even need to give a hypnotic suggestion, just appeared silently, and the guest would collapse like a baby and fall into deep sleep. Graves, on the other hand, thought a haunted house was just about screaming and jump scares. Polly smiled coldly. The moment the freak house opened, she'd grab Erik and go win herself a few $1,000. Suddenly, Polly realized it had been a full week since she last spoke to Erik. Would he agree to see her now, if she sought him out? No rush, though. She thought it over. If she showed up at Graves' place unannounced, he might not even let her in, much less honor his so-called challenge. Better to warm things up in the press first. So the next morning, the people of New Orleans opened their papers and found a new headline, courtesy of Polly. To be fair, before she arrived in New Orleans, the juiciest tabloid stories were limited to the occasional scandal or petty theft. Since her arrival, there had been a fresh sensation almost every day. Some folks wouldn't admit it, but they now flipped straight to her column with their morning coffee. If nothing about her showed up, they were genuinely disappointed. And Polly never let them down. Just 2 weeks after Graves publicly smeared her in the press, she fired back, with calm, devastating precision. "I accept Mr. Graves' challenge," the headline read. Even Graves himself was stunned. When did I ever say I wanted to challenge her? In the article, Polly clarified the origins of her haunted house concept. It absolutely did not come from India as Graves claimed. Then she laid out her case. If Graves had copied not only her haunted house format, but also her gameplay mechanics, what else could that be but a challenge? Her tone remained composed. She stated that once the freak house opened, she would be the first to take on the challenge. If Graves could scare her as badly as Mitt had been scared, she would leave New Orleans forever. Otherwise, he would have to honor his promise. If she cleared the maze in under 8 minutes, he owed her $1,000. It was clearly a lopsided challenge. If Polly lost, she had to disappear from the city permanently. Graves, on the other hand, only had to pay what he had already pledged. Now, if Graves refused the challenge, it would be a public admission that the freak house couldn't compare to Polly's circus. Polly had managed to terrify 3 of New Orleans' most respected gentlemen. If Graves couldn't even scare one woman, who would pay to see his show? Graves finally understood why Polly thrived in New Orleans. Her ability to manipulate public opinion rivaled that of small-time moguls in New York. He even started to suspect that the real mastermind behind Miss Clement's circus might be a man. How else could a woman possess such cunning? So he responded in the press, stating that he welcomed Polly's visit to the freak house and agreed to her terms. With one condition, it must be Polly herself who entered. He didn't insist she go in alone. She was, after all, a woman. If she had a breakdown inside, his reputation would take the hit. If she insisted on going solo, he'd even arrange for someone to accompany her, to avoid negative public opinion. To Graves, the reason men like Mitt became laughingstocks was because they attacked Polly the wrong way. Insulting her was a rookie move. Not only did it tarnish their image as Southern gentlemen, it gave her ammunition to sue for defamation. No, the only way to defeat a woman like Polly was to exploit her natural feminine frailty. He saw right through her strategy. She was baiting him into a war of words so she could collect evidence and sue. He wouldn't fall for it. His response was carefully worded, not a single sentence that could be construed as disrespectful to a lady. He figured she must be panicking at home by now, crying in a corner, terrified after reading his statement. With a smug smile, he pushed her from his mind and went back to directing the set crew. Polly, meanwhile, didn't give a damn what Graves thought. Something far more pressing had consumed her thoughts. Erik had disappeared. For a while, he had been obsessively staring at her, like he couldn't get enough. No matter what she was doing, his eyes always ended up on her lips. Even when she was sleeping, she often felt his gaze tracing the shape of her mouth, even the outline of her tongue. It wasn't paranoia. Every time she woke up in the middle of the night, she'd catch those glowing golden eyes watching her. He never said a word, but the heat in his stare was unmistakable. Even though winter was approaching, the way he looked at her made the room feel sweltering. But she had been too flustered to face it. Whenever he looked at her like that, she'd instinctively look away, almost as if regretting their kiss. Later, once she made peace with her feelings, Erik had already vanished, and now Polly was starting to worry. Had she scared him off? Only now did she realize he still held the power in their relationship. She may have had the emotional upper hand, but everything else, when they met, whether they touched, was entirely up to him. Now that he had disappeared, she had no way to find him. It felt helpless. Unlike Erik, she couldn't move through shadows or hide her presence. As the face of the circus, she had to stay visible, to keep the buzz alive. New Orleans may have frowned on women doing business, but half the circus's popularity came from her being female. People were equal parts judgmental and fascinated. They sneered at her for behaving improperly, yet happily paid to watch her defy social norms. Polly fell into deep thought. How could she regain control? Erik was impossible to manipulate. Get too close, he'd retreat. Stay aloof. He'd vanish altogether. She tried to remember what she had done the last time he showed up. That morning, she had gotten dressed, had breakfast, nothing unusual. Erik had laid out a white satin dress for her, trimmed with fluffy white fur around the collar, cuffs, and hem. She had paired it with a beautiful egret feather hat Theodore had given her. That hat had turned heads everywhere she went, white feathers light and elegant, practically glowing in the sun. Men tipped their hats at her. She felt like a walking magnet. That evening, she returned home still in that outfit. Before she could even change, Erik appeared in her room, watching her silently, expression unreadable. She'd been too flustered to say anything. She took off the hat, draped a scarf over her shoulders, and went downstairs for dinner. When she came back, Erik was gone. So was the egret feather hat. The next morning, she woke to find several new egret feather hats on her bed. Polly didn't know much about feathers, but even she could tell these were far rarer than before. Not just white, but rosy pink and bluish gray. She stared in stunned silence. If Erik ever returned to the modern world with her, she had to tell him. Hunting wild animals is a federal offense. The moment the thought crossed her mind, she froze. Did I just imagine bringing him back to the modern world with me? So maybe it wasn't his obsessive affection that scared her. Maybe it was the century of distance between them. After that, she resumed her usual aloof yet attentive behavior, and he vanished. Now Polly wondered, was it because she wore Theodore's gifted hat and attracted male attention that Erik had shown up? If she dressed up again and took a walk, would he return? Worth a try. That night, Polly put on a black velvet dress, slightly low-cut, revealing her delicate collarbones. She skipped the necklace and tied a thin black ribbon around her neck instead. No hat, no hair clips, just her long, glossy red hair cascading freely over her shoulders. Black was the color of mourning. Red was considered cunning, almost witch-like. Together, the combination gave off an aura of seductive darkness. She draped a white cashmere coat over her shoulders and descended the stairs. In the living room, Theodore was tutoring Thorn. Without looking up, he said, "Just one more section, Miss Clement. Don't worry, we won't be up late tonight." Polly waved him off. "I'm not here to scold. I just want to take a walk." Theodore frowned. "Isn't it a bit late? A lot of new taverns have opened recently. More drunks, more trouble. Are you—" He looked up and stopped mid-sentence. That unclean, almost ominous beauty of hers made his throat dry and palms sweat. He couldn't speak. Polly casually picked up her riding crop and patted the gun holstered under her coat. "Don't worry, I'm armed." But Theodore stood up anyway. He insisted on driving the carriage. Polly thought about it and didn't refuse. It really was safer with him around. Theodore had no ulterior motives, just a genuine desire to protect her. Sure, he had feelings for her, but he never thought he had the right to possess her. Her intelligence, her mysterious background, even her kindness, all made her seem untouchable. Theodore kept a respectful distance. He never asked where she came from, never questioned her wild ideas. Sometimes, curiosity is more dangerous than greed. He couldn't imagine learning the truth about her, only to realize the gulf between them was insurmountable. Better to maintain the distance from the start. Polly had him stop outside a theater. Before stepping down, she asked if he wanted to see the show. He shook his head. "I'll wait here in the carriage." So Polly went in alone and bought a ticket. Turns out, it was a symphony concert. The orchestra was small, about 30 or 40 musicians. The conductor was a young man, early 20s, clean-cut and handsome. Polly tried to enjoy the music, to appreciate the grandeur and refinement of the symphony, but the musicians were all over the place. The performance was mediocre at best. She was starting to drift off, when suddenly a cold voice whispered in her ear, "This man has no charisma. He knows nothing about conducting. Why would you waste your time on this?" She jolted awake. Of course, all she had to do was dress up and sit quietly watching another man perform, and Erik would show up, jealous and furious. "Aren't there 30 or 40 musicians on stage?" she muttered. "Why are you acting like it's all about him?" Erik paused. Unless it's a solo performance, the conductor determines everything. Why? Because he's the true leader. From orchestration to tempo, from balance to emotion, the conductor controls it all. Polly nodded and didn't press further. She didn't ask how he knew so much about music, just like she had never asked him to play an instrument, despite knowing he was a musical genius. And now, here she was, showing up for this mediocre conductor's concert. The moment he realized it, a storm of emotion erupted in his chest, jealousy, so intense it nearly consumed him. He wanted to strangle the conductor on stage. He had never cared much for morality, but this was the first time jealousy made him murderous. Maybe it was because Polly's behavior confused him. When she kissed him, her eyes had burned with desire, but lately, she'd gone cold, avoided eye contact, ignored him. Every time she pulled away, he felt a wild urge to grab her face and kiss her breathless, like before. Then, he noticed the black ribbon around her neck, wrapped tightly around her pale, delicate throat, like someone had their hand around her neck. He realized everyone in the theater had seen her dressed like this, and the madness in his mind began to spiral. Polly felt Erik's eyes on her. He was staring at her neck, specifically, the black satin ribbon tied around it. She had worn it on purpose. It was clear that Erik wanted control over everything she wore, from hats, shawls, gloves, corsets, and petticoats to stockings and shoes. That kind of possessiveness was just another form of domination. And now, she had tied something around her neck that he didn't pick. Of course he was agitated. Polly pretended not to notice and continued watching the concert. Come to think of it, she had never actually seen Erik perform. She had witnessed his architectural genius, his terrifying skills in hypnosis and illusion, but never his greatest talent, music. Many musicians had beautiful hands. Her thoughts drifted. Erik always wore black gloves. He rarely took them off. She'd only ever held his bare hand once. They had kissed, but never properly held hands. That thought itched at her. After the concert ended, Polly was about to leave, when a hesitant voice called out to her, "Excuse me, are you Miss Clement?" Polly turned and found the conductor standing there. She glanced toward Erik's seat. At some point, he had vanished. Polly nodded politely. "And you are?" The conductor approached eagerly, visibly nervous. "I had the honor of seeing your circus show. It was fantastic." He smiled sheepishly. "I'm a bit of a coward. Every time I go in, I get scared out within minutes. But even just 3 or 4 minutes is thrilling enough." Polly hadn't expected to run into such an enthusiastic fan. She blinked and replied with a soft, "Thank you." The conductor continued, "I saw the news about you and Mr. Graves. Everyone around me sides with Graves. They think a woman couldn't possibly come up with something so creative. But I know Graves. He's been at Broadway for years. If he really had a groundbreaking idea, why didn't he launch it there? Why wait until you succeeded in New Orleans to claim it was his?" Realizing he was rambling, the conductor flushed. "Sorry, I got carried away. I didn't expect you to come to my concert. I usually don't talk this much." Polly smiled. "It's all right. I appreciate your support." His cheeks turned even redder, the blush creeping to his ears. His name was Charles Beaufort, a young man in his early 20s, well-bred and neatly handsome, but painfully shy. His family had tried everything to toughen him up, sending him to Europe, pushing him to perform. But he remained timid, especially around women. Eventually, they gave up, hoping he'd marry a strong-willed woman instead, someone who could help manage the family fortune. Charles had immediately thought of Polly. She was the most confident, business-savvy woman he'd ever seen, but he never dared approach her. Who would have guessed he'd spot her in his audience tonight? It felt like fate. Maybe this means I could marry her? I forgot to introduce myself. I'm Charles Beaufort, but you can call me Charlie, he stammered. Miss Clement, I was wondering if you'd ever be open to maybe dinner or a show sometime? Polly blinked. Of course, Charlie. Her lashes fluttered like thick little fans. Charles's heart raced, his face burning bright red. He wanted to say more, but someone from backstage called his name. He reluctantly said goodbye. Sorry, Miss Clement, I have to go. When your circus opens again, I'll be there to support you. Polly watched his retreating figure, already calculating in her mind, just how useful is this bait? Skipping the formality of last names and going straight to a nickname. That level of familiarity between a man and woman was practically intimate. No way Erik would let that slide. She turned to leave the theater. From the hall to the front doors was a long corridor. The audience had long since left. The hallway lights were half dimmed, casting everything in shadow. Suddenly, a black-gloved hand reached out and grabbed her wrist, yanking her into a dark corner. They stood between two statues, shrouded in shadow. The air inside was heavy and warm. Up close, Polly caught his scent. Not quite cologne, but faint and clean, mixed with a sharp, hot wave of hormones. It was the scent of a man unsatisfied. Polly's heart thudded. She hadn't expected him to take the bait this quickly. He held her wrist tightly, gazing down at her. Then, without warning, he tore the satin ribbon from her neck. The feeling of it sliding off sent a sharp tingle down her spine. She instinctively shifted her neck. He caught her chin in his hand. After more than a week of push and pull, it seemed his emotions had grown unstable. Even the smallest movements now triggered his possessiveness. Polly frowned. What do you want? She had never looked at him with such impatience, or rejected his touch so obviously. Even when he had threatened her with a knife, she had remained cooperative. Now, her every gesture screamed, I regret it. She regretted kissing him. She had finally realized how grotesque he was. How repulsive. No wonder she kept avoiding his gaze lately. Every flick of her eyes, every inch of space she tried to create between them, it all screamed, I didn't want that kiss. You forced it on me. The realization sent rage boiling through him. Polly saw he hadn't moved, and prepared to push harder, only for him to suddenly rip off his mask and crush his lips onto hers. Her eyes widened in surprise. Well, this was unexpected. It seemed he had forgotten how to kiss. He didn't even try to be gentle, just crushed their mouths together, twisting her tongue, drinking in her saliva. Polly's tongue ached from the pressure. Her breath caught in her throat. She tried to push him back. He held her neck and pulled away just slightly. If you didn't want to kiss me, you should have said so. She softened. I did want to. Everything I said that day was true. He paused. Look at me. She obeyed. In the dim light, his face was calm, almost unnervingly so. But beneath the surface lurked something fierce and frustrated. As for his appearance, maybe it was the emotional filter, but Polly didn't find him ugly at all. His strong brow, deep eyes, sharp cheekbones, on a perfect face, these would be mesmerizing. On his damaged half, though, they resembled a skull. Hollow, terrifying, especially when jealousy twisted his expression. It became almost monstrous. But to Polly, it was strangely cute. His ears were even redder than last time, tiny blood vessels visible under the skin. Before she could fully take in the sight, he quickly reached up and covered her eyes. Polly's heart stirred. She grabbed his hand. He didn't immediately pull away, curious to see what she'd do. Instead, Polly tugged off his glove. The lighting was dim, so she couldn't see every detail of his palm. But Erik felt her gaze like a brand, scanning every line, every callus, every vein. And then she bent down and kissed his bare palm. For a moment, it felt like a current had jolted through him. He never imagined she would kiss his hand. These weren't the hands of a pampered gentleman. He had killed with them, dragged corpses, spilled blood. His palms were calloused and rough. Then she tilted her head and took one of his fingers into her mouth. He recoiled instantly, his heart hammering, half his body frozen stiff. Her expression remained sweetly innocent. Then she leaned in and kissed the base of his throat, where his Adam's apple quivered wildly. He stood there, paralyzed, while a thought flashed through his mind. Would she do this to Charles Beaufort? That idiot clearly liked her, kept throwing her compliments, letting her call him Charlie. and she hadn't turned him down. She had even agreed to dinner. If they kept dating, would she one day kiss his fingers? His throat? Erik felt his chest tighten, a surge of fury rising from deep within. She must have come from a place with different values. She wasn't shy about kisses, didn't avoid physical closeness. If anyone pursued her, she didn't reject them immediately. Then why couldn't he pursue her too? Erik looked down at her, his eyes darkening. And yet, he knew. If he confessed now, she would say yes. Because she was afraid of dying by his hand. He had never felt this before. She was right in front of him, yet he felt utterly out of control. Maybe because she was still full of mysteries. Her real name, her homeland, how she could read languages from across the ocean. Why she seemed to understand him so well. The words in her notebook described him, yet also didn't. Like she knew someone else, or some version of him. In her eyes, who was he? He had a terrible feeling. If he didn't find out soon, he might regret it forever. So he stared into her eyes and suddenly asked, "Who are you?" Polly answered quickly, "Polly Clement. I want your real name." She blinked, then calmly replied, "Polly Bully. I'll show you how it's written someday." She wasn't trying to hide it. "Where are you from?" "A very far away place." A rare sadness crossed her face. "I want to go back. But I might never be able to." He said the name of a country. Polly nodded. "Close enough?" He asked a few more questions. She answered them all. She said the words in the notebook were guesses, written down so she wouldn't forget his triggers and end up dead. But she never explained why she wanted to start a circus with him. That was a highly intentional move. She could have stayed by the manager's side, offered advice, run things quietly. Yet she picked him. Like she already knew his background, already knew he was more valuable than the manager. The more Erik asked, the more curious he became. She was like salt water. The more you drank, the thirstier you felt. Every question was answered, and yet the restlessness remained. Her past was still a mystery. He stared at her and asked one last question. "Would you kiss Charles Beaufort?" Polly hadn't expected that. She paused, then said, "Do you want me to?" He didn't answer, just stared, like he wanted her to read the answer in his eyes. She already knew what he wanted. Every look, every touch, every warmth in his palm said it. "Don't kiss Charles." But she wanted him to say it out loud. So she asked again, "Do you want me to kiss Charles Beaufort?" Still silence. So she changed tactics. "Then let me ask you something. Why ask my real name? Why ask where I'm from? What do you want from me?" His mind went blank. One thought echoed. She's seen through me. She knew his ugly desires, knew how he wanted to kiss her, touch her, even more. He instinctively stepped back, but Polly grabbed his bare hand, interlacing their fingers palm to palm. The intimacy stunned him. His entire body went rigid. Even the fabric of his trousers pulled tight. Polly looked up at him, eyes clear and calm. What's this reaction supposed to mean? Then she tilted her head. "And why did you rip the ribbon off my neck? What did it remind you of?" "If you tell me your thoughts," she said softly, "I'll tell you all of mine." Shame crushed his reason. On the outside, he looked composed. Inside, his mind buzzed. She knows everything. All the filthy, twisted, unspeakable things. For a second, shame turned into a wave of violent impulse. She was pushing him, forcing him to admit things he couldn't say. So, why not show her instead? But in the end, reason won. He pulled back, released her hand, put on his mask and gloves, and stepped back into the shadows. His voice, faint and distant. "Say what you want, or don't." Polly sighed. She had overplayed her hand, got too cocky, thought she could push him further just because he was finally curious. She waved a hand, pretending indifference. "Fine. It's not like I care what you think anyway." Erik didn't answer. It was as if he hadn't heard her at all. Polly was often amazed by his ability to control his emotions. If she hadn't seen his subtle reactions with her own eyes, she might have believed he was truly as indifferent as he appeared. But she decided to let it go for now. There was something more important. "My dear," she said, "I need your help with something." This was the second time she had called him my dear. Erik turned to look at her. His eyes appeared calm, but goosebumps prickled across his arms. Polly continued, "Did you see the article Graves published in the newspaper?" Erik paused. "Do you want me to kill him?" Polly. She quickly waved her hands. No. I want you to come with me to his freak house. After thinking for a moment, Polly leaned close to his ear and whispered her plan. Erik lowered his eyes, watching her lips instead. So soft, so moist. He wondered if they still held traces of his saliva. The thought of her swallowing his saliva completely drowned out everything she was saying. Polly caught the hungry look in his eyes and couldn't help but ask, "Did you understand?" "No." "Forget it. I'll write it down for you later." Erik said nothing. Polly hated it when he went quiet like that, so she deliberately teased, "If you don't want to go with me, that's fine. I can always ask someone else." Finally, he cut her off with a cold voice. "I'll go with you." Polly smiled, satisfied. After saying that, Erik turned and left. She didn't chase after him. Her goal had been achieved. Leisurely, she took a moment to admire the theater's architecture before returning to the carriage. Day by day, winter settled into New Orleans. Fortunately, it wasn't bitterly cold. A wool cloak over her dress was enough to stay warm. Perhaps fearing she'd really ask someone else, Erik stopped vanishing into thin air like before. Now, every morning when Polly woke up, she would find him reading on the bedroom balcony. Maybe because she had started pulling back again, his attitude toward her had taken on a subtle, aggressive edge. After she got up, he would take the comb from her hands and brush her hair for her. He was so tall that his face stayed out of the mirror's view. Sometimes Polly tried to sneak a glance at his expression while he brushed her hair, but the moment she looked up, he would grab her chin and turn her face back. Even though winters weren't harsh here, he always checked the thickness of her clothes before she went out, gauging if she needed an extra layer. New Orleans was humid and swampy, full of bugs and creepy crawlies. One morning, Polly even shook a fully dead centipede out of her boot. Though she wasn't easily frightened, it still startled her. That was the last time she encountered anything like that. From then on, her shoes were always clean and dry. It felt like someone had already checked for dampness and pests. Their relationship had grown incredibly ambiguous, just one step away from crossing the line. And yet, no matter how many hints she dropped, Erik never took that final step. He hadn't even kissed her again. Polly couldn't understand what he was waiting for. She had already seen his face and kissed it. If she remembered correctly, in the original novel, Erik once said in a fit of rage, "If a woman sees my true face, she's mine. She must love me forever." Was he not angry enough? Strangely, her memory of the original novel was fading. Perhaps because the Erik in front of her wasn't as mad or hysterical as the one in the book, nor as cold-blooded as a horror movie villain. He was fictional, yes, but also vividly real. The more three-dimensional he became in her eyes, the blurrier the novel's version of him became in her mind. Most importantly, they were in New Orleans, America, not Paris, France. And the place they had fallen in love wasn't the Paris Opera House. Sometimes Polly wondered, had she really fallen into a horror version of the Phantom of the Opera? Was Erik truly the Phantom? Did he even exist? Erik caught her staring at him. She often looked at him with that unsettling gaze, like she was seeing someone else through him. He could control the direction of her eyes, but not where they ultimately landed. That made him inexplicably agitated. Every time she looked at him like that, he wanted to grab her and demand, "Who exactly are you seeing?" But he never asked. Even though he had removed his mask, he hadn't truly revealed himself. She knew he was dangerous, but didn't know what he had actually done. He didn't know much about her past either. Before meeting Polly, Erik had never known fear, as if he were born without the capacity for it. But the thought of his bloody, filthy secrets being laid bare before her, of her no longer seeing him as a genius, but as a cold-blooded killer, that idea filled him with a fear he couldn't suppress. Another week passed. Graves' freak house was finally ready. A grand announcement appeared in the newspaper. Polly was already prepared. She immediately submitted a piece to the press. Who delivers the bigger scare? Miss Clement will soon challenge the freak house herself. At the same time, Bob, the reporter, brought her great news. The wire service had selected one of their stories to syndicate nationwide. Polly paused, surprised. "Which one?" Bob said excitedly. "The one about the three gentlemen throwing up in terror. They also heard about your bet with Graves. If you win, someone from the New York Times might come interview us." He was practically glowing with excitement. He grabbed Polly's gloved hand and exclaimed, "Miss Clement, you were right. We're going to be famous." Polly blinked and was about to pull her hand back, but Bob suddenly released her on his own. His face turned ghostly pale. Cold sweat soaked his back. He looked behind her, voice trembling. "Miss Clement, this is..." Before Polly could turn around, Erik's tall figure had already cast a shadow over her. It was the first time he appeared in front of one of her employees. Though Polly and Bob had never signed any formal contract, everyone understood that Bob was a member of the circus. His job site just happened to be elsewhere. Polly never kept much social distance from her staff, and Erik had never shown any objection. He rarely appeared in front of them anyway. Who would have thought that a simple handshake would prompt him to show up like this? Was that a good sign? Polly's mind spun quickly, though her expression remained unchanged. "This is my friend. He personally designed all the circus's mechanisms. He'll also accompany me to Graves' Freak House." Bob's back was now drenched in sweat, his shirt clinging to him. Under Erik's gaze, he felt like his blood had turned to ice, and a heavy stone had lodged in his stomach. For a moment, he nearly blurted out, "Miss Clement, your friend's eyes are terrifying, like he's killed someone. And that white mask." Outside of wanted criminals and robbers, he had never seen anyone wear a mask outside a performance setting. "If he's a friend, then I feel better," Bob stammered, not daring to look at either of them. "I'll get going, Miss Clement. I'll let you know when the wire service confirms." Polly asked, "Aren't you staying for dinner?" "No, nobilium. That's okay." Bob backed away, practically fleeing. Polly turned to Erik, puzzled. His gaze didn't seem that scary. How did he terrify Bob like that? Erik lowered his head to meet her eyes. "What?" "Do you want to stay for dinner?" Polly teased. She fully expected him to refuse, or walk out like he had so many times before. To her surprise, he answered without hesitation, "Okay." Polly was stunned. There's no way he would take off his mask in front of others. So, how was he going to eat? Half an hour later, she got her answer. The dining room in the villa had a long rectangular table capable of seating 8 people. Polly usually sat at the head, while others filled in along the sides. But tonight, as the circus members entered the room, they saw a new figure sitting at the far end of the table. He wore a meticulously tailored black coat, a glimpse of a platinum watch chain at his wrist. The collar, cuffs, and hem all showed the fine craftsmanship of someone clearly upper class, and yet, his face was hidden behind a white mask. On his belt hung a holster and a coil of rope. A dagger was tucked into the side of his boot. Polly didn't introduce him, and the others didn't dare ask. Only Thorn turned pale. The man was his teacher, Erik. In truth, everyone in the circus had taught Thorn something. Theodore taught him to read, Emily taught him to sing, Rivers taught him arithmetic. Marbell and Flora trained him in witty comebacks. They feared that if Polly got into trouble one day, Thorn wouldn't be able to help unless he could at least talk back. But the scariest teacher of all was Erik. Thorn would never forget that sense of total control, of both mind and body. If it had just been hypnosis, he wouldn't have been so afraid. The problem was, Thorn remembered everything. He remembered Erik towering over him and suddenly asking, "What do you feel for Polly Clement?" His mind had been awake, but something inside expanded and spilled outward through his mouth. Admiration. Erik stared at him for a long, terrifying moment before letting him go. Thorn had replayed that scene countless times in his head. He couldn't shake the feeling. If he ever had impure thoughts about Polly, Erik would kill him without hesitation. That brush with death never left his chest. Now, every time he saw Erik, he broke into cold sweats, knees trembling. Polly didn't notice Thorn's unease. She was busy wondering what Erik was up to. He leaned back at the end of the table, resting one hand on it, watching them all eat through the mask's eye holes. Under his gaze, no one dared speak. They just stuffed food into their mouths. Polly. Well, it was a weird atmosphere, but oddly heartwarming. After dinner, the group quickly cleaned up and scattered. Erik stood as if to leave the villa. Polly called out to him. He paused and turned slightly. Polly said, "You've been to my house so many times, but I've never been to yours. What are you getting at?" I thought it was obvious. Polly stepped in front of him and tilted her head. "I want to visit your home." Erik lowered his eyes to meet hers. In that instant, 1,000 images flashed through his mind. Messy sheet music, a piano with broken strings, bizarre paintings in the study, especially the paintings. At a glance, they seemed to vary. Realistic portraits, layered landscapes, meticulously detailed still lifes. But they all shared one thing in common, Polly. Even a simple brown clay pot, if studied closely, revealed subtle impressions of her features in the brushstrokes. It was as if he had always been painting Polly, only later disguising them as other works. That wasn't a home. It was a house saturated with Polly. She was everywhere, even in the air he exhaled when thinking of her. So he looked away and replied coolly, "Another time." Soon, Polly had no time to wonder where Erik lived. Graves' official invitation arrived. She was scheduled to attend the challenge the next afternoon. Truthfully, even if Graves hadn't publicly insulted her, Polly would have been curious about what kind of haunted house he could design. She had never underestimated the intelligence of 19th century people. After all, during the Industrial Revolution, there were countless minds far brighter than hers. Forget the past or the future. Just in her current time, there was Nikola Tesla. Even Tesla had taken nearly 5 years to convince the public that alternating current was safe. During that period, countless interest groups tried to block the rise of AC power. Every era is full of genius and innovation. The real challenge is overcoming vested interests, publicizing your ideas, and winning the trust of ordinary people. That's why Edison, who understood the importance of these things, became more famous and more wealthy than Tesla. The next morning, Polly dressed in a light, simple gown, no hoop skirt, no layers of underskirts, something she could move freely in. Erik's look surprised her. He wore his usual sharp black coat and a mask, but this time, not the usual waxy, hollow white one. It was a silver metal mask, gleaming under the light. Even more shocking, he revealed the unscarred half of his face. Before, no matter how refined his clothes, the stark white mask made him look like a cold-blooded serial killer from a horror film. Now, with this new mask, the inhuman eeriness was reduced. He no longer looked like a monster. Instead, he looked like a well-disguised psychopath. Polly. Well, that was her type, after all. She couldn't tell if it was just her imagination, but he seemed more and more concerned with his appearance lately. In the beginning, she'd had to beg him just to change into clean clothes. Now he was wearing cologne. And a new mask? Polly blinked, giving him a once-over. That's when she noticed the mechanical watch on his wrist. Even in modern times, mechanical watches were more ornamental than practical. He really was dressing up for her. And indeed, Erik had gotten all dolled up for Polly. He just hadn't expected her gaze to be so direct, so heated, starting at his face, sliding to his collar, finally settling on his wrist. Every detail he'd carefully adjusted, she caught them all. She was tracing them with her eyes, outlining them, memorizing them. The air between them turned sticky. His ears began to flush, the shame in his body surging uncontrollably. Some unspeakable physical reaction rose quickly to the surface. And yet, this time, even with his body aching, he didn't want her to look away. As she focused on the unmarred half of his face, he felt a dark urge, a desire he had never felt before. He wanted to step closer, to press her palm against a certain sharply contoured part of his body, to ask, "Why do you only look at the perfect half? Why won't you look at the broken side?" Whatever her reason, she had no right to be so biased. Polly noticed his ears and neck were flushed bright red. She couldn't help wondering, if she leaned over and kissed the exposed side of his face, would his whole face turn red too? Before she could act on that impulse, a knock came at the door. Mrs. Freeman informed them that the carriage was ready. Polly reluctantly withdrew her gaze. She put on a wide-brimmed straw hat, tied the ribbon under her chin, and headed for the door, then paused, turning back with wide, hopeful eyes. "Can I take your arm?" she asked sweetly. Erik didn't reply. He simply adjusted his coat and stepped forward, clearly offering his arm. But Polly wasn't about to let him off that easily. She pretended not to notice and said with disappointment, "Oh, I guess not then." Then she turned and walked out the door. A moment later, he grabbed her wrist and yanked her back. Polly's heart skipped a beat. He still didn't say a word, but he firmly locked her arm in his. Polly couldn't help laughing. This was not how people usually linked arms. He lowered his head and said coolly, "Aren't we going?" Going, she muttered. It was Polly's first time stepping out with a male companion, and Erik's visible half-face was so striking that passers-by immediately assumed he was her mysterious lover. Some even came up with a narrative. Polly's reputation was too controversial, so this gentleman wore a mask to protect both her and himself. Polly finally understood why Erik had dined with her staff yesterday, and why he chose to show his face today. Even though he hated being seen in public, he wanted everyone around them to know what they were to each other. The only problem was, they weren't anything yet. He had never confessed his feelings, never even said he liked her, and yet he wanted to cling to her like this, without defining the relationship. Polly adored all his little subtle tricks and emotional acrobatics, but that didn't mean she would just give in. So once they got into the carriage, she quietly pulled her arm away and turned to look out the window. Erik glanced at her, but didn't pull her back. Polly felt a pang of disappointment, so she made up her mind not to take his arm once they got off the carriage either, and she stuck to it. When they arrived at the freak house, she didn't even glance at Erik, just lifted her skirts and hopped down. Then she left him behind, chatting and laughing with Theodore as they walked toward the mansion ahead. Halfway there, she glanced back. Erik followed silently behind them, eyes locked on her and Theodore, expression unreadable. But Polly felt his gaze burning 2 holes in her back. Graves had been waiting at the villa entrance for quite some time. In his mind, Polly was a bitter old spinster, sharp-tongued and aggressive. He never expected her to be so young and beautiful. He froze for a moment, but Graves had seen his share of beauties on Broadway. He quickly regained composure. He stepped forward, ready to kiss her hand. But a gloved black hand shot out and grabbed his wrist. Graves was stunned by the audacity. He was about to explode, until he looked up and met a pair of golden eyes. Erik stared back, cold and unflinching. Polly was keeping her distance again, chatting happily with Theodore. Theodore was off limits. He was her employee, and Erik couldn't kill him. But Graves? Who the hell was Graves to think he could kiss Polly's hand? Erik's eyes darkened with fury, and he tightened his grip. A cold sweat broke across Graves' forehead. He could hear a sharp crack in his wrist, like the bone was about to snap, skin about to split open. Just as disaster was about to strike, Polly placed her hand over Erik's. In less than a second, that ironclad grip melted away. She easily pried Erik's hand off. Then, as if to keep him in check, she interlocked their fingers, tightly holding his hand. "I'm sorry, Mr. Graves," she said sweetly. "My friend didn't know you meant to kiss my hand. He thought you were doing something inappropriate." Graves, drenched in cold sweat, was still reeling from the pain in his wrist. Her friend was clearly insane. If it weren't for the public spectacle, he would have kicked them out on the spot. But to be fair, kissing the hand of an unmarried woman wasn't entirely proper either. He had to let it go. "It's fine," he said through gritted teeth. Polly apologized again. The onlookers hadn't seen what happened. They were busy urging her to get on with the challenge. Polly glanced at the crowd and spotted a journalist. Clearly, Graves had copied her PR tactics, hoping to catch her at a moment of weakness and plaster it across tomorrow's papers. Graves noticed her gaze and smiled falsely. "Miss Clement, I forgot to tell you, I plan to photograph your walkthrough for promotional purposes. Of course, only if you're willing. If you'd rather not, we won't." It was obviously a trap. If she refused, people would remember how she published photos of the 3 humiliated gentlemen and accuse her of double standards. Polly blinked, then smiled brightly. "Of course I'm willing. Just make sure I look good in the pictures." Graves, certainly. After a round of pleasantries, Polly prepared to enter the freak house. She had to admit, the villa looked far more upscale than her little tavern. If not for her current fame and the press watching her every move, Polly would have loved to seize this property the same way she had with Tricky's. But never mind. For now, she'd settle for squeezing Graves for all he was worth. Right before going in, she turned to him and asked one final question, loud enough for all to hear. "Mr. Graves, do you still remember our bet?" "Of course," Graves replied. "If you clear the house in under 8 minutes, I owe you $1,000. If not, you must leave New Orleans forever." Polly added, "You're aware that my haunted house allows multiple attempts, right?" Graves paused. "What do you mean?" Polly's tone was innocent. "I have guests who visit every day. Some play the game several times. If they clear the maze within 8 minutes each time, I reward them with cash for each attempt. I just want to know, will the freak house honor rewards the same way?" There was no way Graves could say no in front of this crowd. To do so would be admitting that his haunted house wasn't as good as hers. So, despite his misgivings, he answered, "Of course." Polly smiled. "Great." Then she turned to the crowd and said, Everyone heard that, right? Graves started to feel uneasy. Had he made a mistake? From within the crowd, Bob raised his notebook and shouted, "Already written it down!" Graves asked, "Miss Clement, who is that?" Polly replied sweetly, "Don't worry, he's just another journalist. He means no harm, just documenting your words." Graves had no choice but to force a smile and swallow his doubts. His team was professional, after all. His writers, his actors, they'd all once shined on Broadway. Sure, they weren't famous anymore, but no one stayed famous forever. Before inviting Polly, he'd asked a few friends to try the haunted house. They'd all come out pale and shaking, calling it the most thrilling experience they'd ever had. Graves didn't know the full layout of Polly's haunted house, only what he'd seen in newspaper reports. From that, he'd guessed her business model. He believed the real reason people found her shows scary was because they had never seen anything like them before. Once he understood how her tricks worked, he was certain her circus was a joke. Aside from that lawyer who'd washed out of New York, her cast was made up entirely of freaks. And freaks? They weren't actors. In Graves' mind, freaks just stood on stage like specimens, objects to gawk at. But while designing his haunted house, he'd realized props alone aren't enough. You need actors with skill to truly scare people. That's why he believed if he copied Polly's model and added professional talent, he would crush her. Suddenly, a burst of applause broke out in the crowd. Polly's freak performers were cheering for her. Polly waved at them with a smile and walked into the villa. She didn't care about anyone's opinions. Her hand stayed firmly clasped with Erik's the whole time. Graves sneered. An unmarried woman, holding hands so intimately with a man. She was every bit the scandalous woman the rumors described. He lit a cigar and said to the press, "Watch carefully. Today, I'll make sure she leaves New Orleans for good." The moment Polly stepped into the villa, the doors slammed shut behind her with a loud bang. A wave of gasps rippled through the crowd outside. Polly raised an eyebrow. Automatic doors weren't a thing yet, so this mechanism was surprisingly decent. "That's just a basic pulley system," Erik said casually. Polly looked up at him. He didn't glance at her. His tone was flat, like he was stating a simple fact. But Polly caught the subtext. To him, this was child's play. In the past, she might have responded in kind, praised his brilliance a little. But now, she was no longer interested in coddling his ego. She gave a nonchalant M&M, then let go of his hand and walked ahead. Erik stood there, staring after her for a long moment before silently following. After being cold-shouldered a few times, the storm in his eyes grew stronger. He was clearly agitated, yet confused, unsure what he'd done to offend her. As Polly searched for clues, she glanced back at him as if by accident. He was staring straight at her, his gaze cold, intense, violently possessive. Her chest tingled like ants were crawling over it. She immediately lowered her head, biting back a smile. God help me. I almost lost control. Erik misread her reaction, thinking she couldn't bear to look at him. His emotions teetered on the edge, rage and vulnerability swirling in his eyes like a hurricane barely held back. Polly's heart fluttered with even more curiosity. She forced herself to stay composed and kept walking. Then came the first jump scare, a loud mechanical whir, followed by a ghostly figure plummeting from the ceiling, its face twisted in evil, vengeful rage as if ready to leap at her. Polly's heart skipped a beat, but she quickly composed herself and leaned in for a better look, curious about the actor's makeup. Suddenly, the ghost let out a terrified scream. Polly turned immediately. Erik met her gaze, still simmering with irritation. Apparently, he had found the control for the rope system and sent the ghost actor back up. The poor actor thought the mechanism had malfunctioned and shrieked in panic, his voice echoing hauntingly through the empty villa. Polly. Good thing this wasn't a modern haunted house. Otherwise, the actor might have called the cops by now. She didn't dare let Erik stay behind her anymore. She quickly returned to him and grabbed his hand, keeping pace beside him. The moment she touched him, his anger eased. The storm in his eyes calmed, his mood clearly improving. Afraid she might drift away again, he kept his eyes glued to her face, watching every micro-expression with laser focus. Polly felt her chest tighten, her breath quicken. His gaze made her skin tingle, made it nearly impossible to focus. Still, she got the gist of the freak house plot. It was a haunted mansion full of paranormal activity. Guests had to gather enough clues to find the key and escape. Basically, it was a direct rip-off of her idea. Polly suspected Graves had never actually visited her haunted house. Otherwise, he wouldn't have set the horror elements so basic. Almost everything relied on jump scares. Walk into a room, the wardrobe bursts open. Take another step, the lights flicker out. There was no build-up, no tension. Take that ghost earlier, for example. Yes, it dropped suddenly, but surprise isn't the same as fear. What if, before the ghost fell, guests heard strange creaks above them? Then sticky blood began to drip slowly onto the floor. And as they looked up to trace it, they found a ghost silently staring down from the ceiling. That would have been terrifying. The key to fear is anticipation. From that moment on, guests would panic. They wouldn't think clearly. They'd just want to run. Polly shook her head, disappointed. To be fair, Graves did a decent job copying her structure without ever stepping foot in her haunted house. Still, she doubted he avoided her circus out of courtesy. Most likely, he thought her design wasn't even worth checking out. He figured all he needed to copy was the plot and the format. Everything else? Trash. Well, since he liked her haunted house so much, she figured she'd personally invite him to experience it next time. Within 5 minutes, Polly had collected all the clues and found the key. And this was without Erik's help. If he had stepped in, they might have been out the moment they walked in. Not because he was better at solving puzzles, but because the front door was the exit. As a master of trapdoors and hidden levers, all Erik had to do was tweak the mechanism, and boom, open sesame. After all, Graves hadn't specified that the key was the only way out. When Polly pushed open the villa door, Graves was standing outside, holding a pocket watch, counting down for the crowd. 10, 9, 8. The sound of the door opening hit him like a bucket of ice water. His booming voice faltered, cut short in disbelief. He turned around, stunned. For a few seconds, he thought he was hallucinating. Polly had come out in under 8 minutes. What shocked him even more was her appearance. Calm, unbothered, radiant. She wasn't sweating. She wasn't panting. She didn't look remotely scared. She smiled. She was graceful. It was as if she hadn't just walked through a haunted house, but taken a leisurely stroll through a flower garden. The crowd murmured uneasily. Whispers spread. Maybe Graves' haunted house wasn't as good as Polly's circus. Graves' heart thundered in his chest. He felt cold all over. A dreadful thought crept in. His entire investment, this expensive, debt-laden freak house, might collapse today. But he quickly forced a smile and began laughing loudly. People looked at him like he was crazy. "Miss Clement," he said with exaggerated cheer. "I knew you'd finish in under 8 minutes. You were on the easiest setting, designed for guests with delicate nerves." He shook his head, as if disappointed. "I thought you'd breeze through it faster." 7 minutes, though? Tisk, what a pity. Polly's smile vanished. "Mr. Graves," she said coldly, "you know exactly what this challenge represents." Graves opened his mouth to reply, but she cut him off, voice sharp and firm. "This isn't just a game. It's about honor. I came here knowing I might have to leave New Orleans forever. And you let me play on the easiest setting?" Her voice rang out over the crowd. "This isn't just an insult to me. It's an insult to everyone who came to witness this." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the crowd. Graves hadn't just humiliated Polly, he had wasted everyone's time. His palms were soaked with sweat. His knees felt weak. Still, he forced another smile and said, "Miss Clement, it was only a joke. Our bet still stands. 8 minutes or less wins you $1,000. Before she could respond, he pulled out his checkbook, uncapped his pen, quickly scribbled, and tore off a check. He handed it to Thorne, who stood nearby. "You're Miss Clement's assistant, right? Here's the $1,000. Please accept it." Graves tried to act generous and relaxed, but his heart was bleeding. That was $1,000. Setting aside bank loans, he only had about $3,000 in total assets. He secretly hoped Polly would consider the money an insult and decline to take it. Instead, she nodded at Thorne, who accepted it without hesitation. Graves' face twitched. He nearly lost his fake smile. "Miss Clement," he said, stroking his beard with trembling fingers. "Care to continue?" "Continue what?" Polly asked knowingly. "Another round in the freak house," Graves said through clenched teeth. "You said your haunted house allows repeat visits. I'll tell the actors to give you the full experience this time." Polly raised a brow. "Same wager?" He didn't even pretend to smile. "Of course. If you take longer than 8 minutes, you leave New Orleans. If not, another $1,000 for you." Polly smiled sweetly. "Deal. Deal." The crowd erupted in excitement. People had just witnessed Polly win $1,000 with barely any effort. Now, they were itching to try the haunted house themselves. Graves finally calmed down. From a business standpoint, Polly was basically advertising the freak house for him. She hadn't actually handed out any cash in her own haunted house, but he had just paid her in full. In a casino, seeing someone win doesn't drive people away. It draws them in. Encouraged, Graves found the director and gave a clear order. "I don't care what it takes. Scare her. Make her scream, shake her up, ruin her composure." The director hesitated, clearly uncomfortable. Graves glared at him. "You can't even frighten a woman? How are we supposed to run this place?" The director paused, then said cautiously, "Sir, we already did our best." Graves thought it was just an excuse. "Try harder. Use everything. Scaring people is the easiest job in the world. If you can't do this, you're fired." The director bit his tongue. How was he supposed to explain that they were the ones getting scared? That strange man with the mask seemed to know every hidden lever, every secret door in the house. Sometimes, before actors could even make an entrance, they were yanked back like puppets on a string. Polly herself might not be a trap expert, but she was unnerving in her own way. She wasn't the first guest to go through the freak house. Dozens had come before her. All of them screamed, scattered, or panicked when actors jumped out. Even the brave ones were eventually swept up in the group hysteria. But Polly? She didn't flinch. She examined them, with the calm gaze of an art critic admiring a painting. The director had seen bold women before, but they still carried smelling salts in case they needed to faint gracefully. Polly had no such virtue. The gleam in her eyes when she looked at the actors sent chills down his spine. Still, with Graves in a rage, he didn't dare speak the truth. He returned to the actors and told them to prepare. Again, the actors groaned. Before Polly, they thought they were the ones doing the scaring. Now, they were the ones terrified, never knowing when they might get scared next. A few even considered quitting on the spot. And then, it happened. This time, Polly cleared the freak house in 6 minutes flat. The crowd erupted in chaos. Shouts, applause, disbelief. She had won another $1,000. If not for the very public bet, and the way Graves nearly cried as he tore the check, people might have suspected this was a stunt. Some started murmuring, "Miss Clement, are you sure you're not working with Mr. Graves? You two aren't in cahoots, right? Trying to scam us? No way that money's so easy to win." Even Graves began to suspect Polly had bribed the actors to go easy on her. The more he thought about it, the more likely it seemed. She had crafted the bet in her favor. She kept her eyes on the prize money. Graves' expression darkened. He decided to send Polly in one more time. And this time, he would personally jump out and scare her. Forget the actors. Let's see how she survives him. Polly hadn't expected that, after Graves had already handed over $2,000, he would still insist on another round. The crowd was growing visibly restless. Some were beginning to look at her with suspicion, doubting whether she and Graves were putting on a show to fool them. Polly felt a little wronged, but there was no way she'd pass up the chance to milk another $1,000. Let them gossip all they want, she wasn't leaving that money on the table. Graves had no intention of letting her walk away easily either. Even if he had to eat the loss of $2,000, he was determined to drive Polly out of New Orleans for good. He had been present during the rehearsal, so he knew how to operate the stage's mechanisms. In his eyes, scaring people was the easiest job in the world. Just like a Jack-in-the box, all it took was jumping out at the right time. He couldn't understand why the actors had failed at such a simple task. Other than conspiring with Polly to swindle him out of his money, he couldn't think of another explanation. Once Polly went in again, she'd probably assume the actors would go easy on her. And in that moment of lowered guard, if he jumped out to scare her, she might end up just like those 3 gentlemen, vomiting from fright. With that thought, Graves immediately summoned the director to share his theory. He wasn't worried about the director betraying him. The two had been friends for years, and the director was also a co-investor in the freak house. There was no reason for betrayal. After hearing Graves' brilliant plan, the director looked like he wanted to speak but hesitated. To be fair, Graves' guess wasn't entirely wrong. During their soft launch, this kind of scare tactic had worked on quite a few people. But the problem was, it simply didn't work on Polly. She behaved as if she'd been terrified so many times that she had become immune. Her reactions showed an uncanny familiarity with every trick in the book. Sometimes the director would be hiding in a secret passage and overhear her discussing with the masked man how they could improve the scare factor. The director was horrified. What kind of person casually brainstorms ways to terrify others like it's an art form? The story of the Freak House was about an evil witch who, long ago, imprisoned innocent people in various rooms of a cursed mansion. The guests had to search for clues while being on guard against the revenge of these cursed souls. Polly's review? Feels like a children's story. The director had taken that as a jab and didn't think much of it. Until she continued, "If it were up to me, I'd base it on real history. New Orleans has a famous serial killer, Madame Mallory. She lived at 1140 Royal Street and tortured and murdered countless slaves in her mansion. Some of them were imprisoned so long that their limbs stretched and softened from the chains, yet they still couldn't move because of the iron collars with spikes around their necks. Struggle, and they'd bleed out instantly. Now imagine guests opening a door and seeing actors portraying mutilated, imprisoned victims. Even if they know it's fake, the knowledge that this horror really happened, right here, would send shivers down anyone's spine." She sighed. To ignore such perfect material and go with a generic witch story, what a waste. The director pictured it in his mind, and his scalp tingled, goosebumps rising on his arms. He passed 1140 Royal Street often. It had been converted into a cheap apartment building, mostly housing the poor, workers, and immigrants. It had a reputation for being haunted. More than one person claimed to have seen ghosts there. If they had bought that building instead of this mansion, the newspapers would have lined up to cover it, without any gimmicks. The director began to feel regret. He wanted to suggest to Graves that maybe they should stop before it was too late. They could still walk away with their reputations intact and start fresh elsewhere. He didn't want to battle Polly in New Orleans anymore. There was something almost cursed about her presence. The way she casually talked about serial killers, like she was discussing dinner plans, was more chilling than any horror scene she'd described. She could have this market. They could find another city, buy a different crime-ridden property, and recreate a truly terrifying freak house. Money could be made anywhere. Why die on this hill? But just as the director began to voice this opinion, Graves cut him off with a snarl. "Ames, don't tell me you've been bought off by that Clement woman too?" Extreme rage makes people irrational. The director understood Graves' fury. If he were in Graves' shoes, he wouldn't want to admit he'd been defeated by a woman either. In the past, and even now, women were treated like fragile children. Innocent, naive, always under the care of men. If something happened to them, be it insults or assault, men would step up to defend them. But even the director had to admit, Polly wasn't like any woman they'd ever seen. She was calm, fearless, observant, full of strange, brilliant ideas. Her business savvy surpassed most men. If they walked away now, they could take just one of her throwaway ideas and make a killing elsewhere. But Graves clearly wouldn't accept that. The director and Graves were merely business partners, not lifelong comrades. The director had invested heavily in the Freak House, but he wasn't going to let Graves throw it all away for pride. So, he made a snap decision, cut ties, and bail. Graves had no idea his business partner was already preparing to run with the money. He handed his pocket watch to an assistant and ordered them to keep time outside. Then, he slipped into a secret passage inside the villa, ready to personally scare Polly at the first jump scare point. Polly, of course, saw all this and instantly guessed his plan. Her first thought? She needed to hold Erik's hand, tightly. Otherwise, Graves might actually get scared to death by his own haunted house. Normal guests come to haunted houses expecting to be scared. It's part of the thrill. But Graves? He was coming to do the scaring. He had no idea what was waiting for him. And he wasn't trained in acrobatics or trap mechanisms. If Erik pulled one of his usual tricks, the man might literally keel over from shock. So, as they stepped into the freak house for the third time, Polly immediately grabbed Erik's hand and interlaced their fingers. Erik looked down at their joined hands. This was the third time today she had flipped between warmth and coldness. Maybe it was because she was being so playfully evasive, but a mad idea suddenly flashed through his mind. Why not forge a pair of shackles and chain her to me forever? Then she couldn't come and go as she pleased. Unlike before, this wasn't just a fleeting thought. It burned through his veins like fire, heating his very bones. He could hear it, his own bones crackling from the heat of desire. So urgent, so hungry. He stared at her hand, his gaze dark. For a second, he saw it clearly, the vision of her shackled to him, unable to leave. He should have done this long ago. She feared his violence, feared his face, and desperately wanted him to remove his mask. Someone must have told her, if she could just accept his face, he'd trust her. But what she didn't know was, once someone sees his face, they belong to him. They are his wife. She would never truly love him. But so what? He had hundreds of ways to ensure she could never leave. If she promised to stay, he could give her everything. If she was scared of his face, he could even make a mask that looked just like a normal man, to hide his deformity. This thought should have passed in a flash, but instead, jealousy flared in his chest. At that moment, Polly felt Erik slip his hand away. She blinked, looked up. He said nothing, just stared at her, then slowly peeled off his black gloves, revealing long, pale, elegant fingers. Polly's breath caught. Because he so rarely removed his gloves in front of her, this moment felt almost taboo. It wasn't just a glove. It was like he had removed a layer of himself, something he didn't want anyone to see. If she didn't know better, she'd think he was seducing her. He casually tucked the glove into his coat pocket and then grabbed her hand again. Until now, it had always been her initiating their hand-holding. But this time, he slowly laced his fingers with hers and squeezed tightly, so tight her knuckles cracked slightly. It was rare for him to be the one initiating, and it made her feel a rush of inexplicable excitement. She could hardly imagine how happy she'd be if he always took the lead. Looks like the hot and cold tactic really was working, but it had taken her so much effort to get just this one moment. How long would it take before he admitted he liked her? She fell into thought. What else could provoke an emotional reaction from him? Something like this hot and cold rhythm. Then it hit her. She'd never actually accepted any of her pursuers. Maybe that's why he never felt threatened? He didn't even want to say something like, "I don't want you kissing Charles Beaufort." Using other people to make someone jealous was a last resort tactic in romance. But maybe she had a bit of a kink, because just the thought of Erik getting angry and attacking her in a jealous rage made her heart race, face flush, and palms sweat. He had already removed his mask, his gloves, like she was unwrapping a beautifully packaged gift. And with every layer, a new surprise made her heart pound. Now she understood why some people loved extreme sports. Her mind games with Erik weren't deadly, but the adrenaline rush was the same. That thrill of being close to death, but never quite touching it, was addictive. If she hadn't met him, she might have never discovered this side of herself. She wasn't just peeling off his masks, she was stripping away her own. And it felt so good. She almost leaned down and kissed the back of his hand. Almost. She stopped herself just in time. Before they knew it, they had reached the first jump scare point. That's when Polly remembered. Graves was inside, waiting to scare them. She was just about to warn Erik not to mess with the trap mechanisms, lest he scare Graves half to death, when Erik looked up, coldly scanning the ceiling. Just a moment ago, he had definitely been trying to tempt her. He still felt shame about his body. He didn't think any part of him was worth admiration or affection. But Polly clearly favored his hands. Every time she stared at him, it was when he was putting on or removing gloves. So he'd braced himself, forced down the burning shame, and removed his glove. And yet, she had only looked at his hand for a second, then looked away. She had ignored him. That sharp burning shame surged to his head. His ears, cheeks, neck, all flushed red. In that moment, he wanted to take her hand and trace it across his palm, through his fingers, down to the very veins. If she wouldn't look with her eyes, maybe she'd learn with her touch. But just then, the pulley system clicked, and a ghost was about to drop from the ceiling. Erik's expression twisted. He hit the mechanism control without hesitation. Graves was brimming with confidence. He was sure Polly would be caught off guard. After all, if the actors were all in on it, she'd never expect an extra scare from him. This time she'd definitely scream. But just as the rope began to lower him down, it jerked violently upward, like something had malfunctioned. Graves panicked, flailing wildly. He wasn't a trained stunt performer, and he was overweight. The mechanism could barely support his weight. With all the struggling, it suddenly froze. Rope stuck mid-air. Dangling upside down, panicked and lightheaded, Graves saw stars. Then his vision went black, and he passed out cold. Polly watched the whole thing unfold, struck by one thought: handsome men are dangerous. If Erik hadn't taken off his glove and flashed that beautiful hand in front of her, she would have remembered this scare setup earlier, and Graves wouldn't be unconscious now. Now the real question was, would she still get her $1,000? If Graves had stayed conscious through the entire round, she definitely would have earned it. But now that he'd passed out, the payout was up in the air. Fine. First things first. Save the man. Polly let go of Erik's hand and ran to the front of the mansion, pressing the emergency assistance button. Graves' staff immediately opened the villa doors and rushed in. They thought Polly had gotten scared and was calling for help. What they didn't expect was to see their boss dangling from the ceiling like a cartoon villain. Graves' position was so bizarre, and his posture so ridiculous, that it quickly drew a crowd of onlookers. Soon, the fire department arrived, set up a ladder, and pulled him down. In the chaos, Polly didn't notice that Erik was staring down at his abandoned hand, expression unreadable, something dark and bone-chilling flickering behind his golden eyes. If you like this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe to Nuevi Story. Thanks for listening.